my wife's long-running affair with my friend, is ruined when I catch her red-handed and expose everything by printing out her secret messages. My name is Daniel, a software engineer by profession, and for the past decade I've been married to Laura. From the outside, our marriage seemed perfect. We shared a beautiful home, traveled frequently, and celebrated each milestone with our close-knit group of friends. Among them was Mark, my best friend since college. He had been a constant presence in our lives, almost like family. The three of us often shared dinners, holidays, and even the occasional weekend getaway. But there was an undercurrent I couldn't quite put my finger on. Laura had grown increasingly distant over the past year. At first, I chalked it up to stress from her demanding job as a marketing executive. Yet, there were moments, fleeting but telling, when I'd catch a strange, almost conspiratorial glance between her and Mark. It wasn't enough to raise alarms, but it planted a seed of doubt in my mind, a seed that would soon blossom into a full-blown investigation into the secret life my wife was leading right under my nose. And the curiosity that gnawed at me relentlessly was this: what if I was imagining it all? What if the subtle shift in our relationship was something entirely innocent? The seed of doubt planted itself firmly in my mind, and I couldn't shake it. Every shared joke, every lingering glance between Laura and Mark, now seemed loaded with hidden meaning. I started to notice Laura's frequent absences and her sudden need for privacy. She began working late more often, and her phone, once casually left on the kitchen counter, was now always clutched tightly or tucked away out of sight. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, I noticed her texting someone. Her demeanor changed slightly. She seemed nervous, almost guilty. When I casually asked who she was messaging, she smiled too brightly and said it was just a colleague from work. My heart sank as I watched her type away, her face illuminated by the screen. It wasn't the first time I'd felt a pang of suspicion, but it was the moment I decided I needed to find out the truth, no matter the cost. What was she hiding, and why did it involve Mark so often? The uneasy questions swirled in my mind, pushing me toward a path I never thought I'd take. Determined to uncover the truth, I began to pay closer attention to Laura's actions. I started small, checking her phone bills and noting down unfamiliar numbers. My heart raced each time I found Mark's number listed far too frequently. I couldn't confront her without concrete proof, so I became more methodical, logging every suspicious call and text. One night, while Laura was in the shower, I took a risky step. I accessed her laptop, hoping to find something that would confirm my suspicions. My hands trembled as I navigated through her emails and social media accounts, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. Just as I was about to give up, I stumbled upon an encrypted folder. It required a password, and my heart sank, realizing it wasn't going to be that easy. Yet, my resolve only strengthened. I had to know what was inside that folder. The truth was there, I could feel it, and I was willing to dig as deep as necessary to uncover it. Frustration mounted, but I refused to back down. Over the next few weeks, I observed and listened, becoming almost a stranger in my own home, driven by the need to expose whatever Laura and Mark were hiding. Every stolen glance, every secretive whisper between them, fanned the flames of my determination. I knew that sooner or later they would slip up, and when they did, I would be ready. My opportunity came one afternoon when Laura left her phone unattended on the kitchen counter. The device buzzed with a new message, and curiosity got the better of me. I picked it up, my heart pounding in my chest. The message preview displayed just enough to confirm my worst fears. It was from Mark. My hands shook as I quickly scrolled through their conversation, a litany of intimate and incriminating messages revealing the depth of their betrayal. Each word felt like a dagger, cutting deeper into my soul. They had been carrying on for months, under my very nose. They reminisced about their secret meetings, the stolen kisses, and their plans for the future. The casualness with which they discussed their deceit was sickening. I felt a rush of nausea but forced myself to read on, needing to absorb every detail. I couldn't confront Laura immediately. Instead, I copied the messages, emailing them to myself as evidence. My mind raced with conflicting emotions: rage, heartbreak, disbelief. The reality of their affair was undeniable, and the weight of their betrayal pressed heavily on my chest. As I put her phone back and tried to steady my breathing, I knew there was no turning back. The next steps were clear. I had to confront her, but I needed a plan to ensure the truth was exposed in a way that left no room for denial or escape. The days that followed were a blur of emotions. I barely slept, my mind replaying every moment of their betrayal. I felt a mix of rage, sorrow, and utter devastation. How could Laura, the woman I had loved and trusted for so long, do this to me? And Mark, my best friend, how could he so callously destroy our bond? At work, I struggled to focus, my thoughts constantly drifting back to those damning messages. I couldn't escape the pain. It was a constant, gnawing presence in my chest. I avoided Laura as much as possible, feigning busyness or fatigue to keep from having to engage in conversation. Every time I looked at her, I saw the deception and lies hidden behind her smile. One evening, as I sat alone in our bedroom, the weight of it all came crashing down. I broke down, tears streaming down my face as the reality of my broken marriage hit me. I felt lost and betrayed, like my entire world had been turned upside down. But in the midst of my anguish, a steely resolve began to form. I wouldn't let them get away with this. They needed to face the consequences of their actions, and I would make sure of it. Amid the swirling storm of emotions, I realized that confronting Laura head-on, without a solid plan, could backfire. I needed to ensure that the truth was undeniable and their betrayal was exposed in the most unequivocal manner. So, I spent a few more days meticulously organizing my evidence, making sure I had everything I needed to confront her and reveal the affair to the world if necessary. I decided to print out the most incriminating messages, creating a dossier that laid bare their affair in black and white. Each page felt heavier than the last as I watched the printer spit out their secret conversations. I kept them in a folder, hidden away until the right moment. Every time I looked at it, my resolve hardened. This wasn't just about exposing their lies. It was about reclaiming my dignity and the life they had trampled on. I planned my confrontation for a Saturday, knowing Laura would be home and Mark would likely stop by, as he often did on weekends. That morning, I moved through the house like a ghost, barely acknowledging Laura's attempts at small talk. She sensed something was off, but had no inkling of the storm about to hit. As the clock ticked towards the inevitable showdown, I steeled myself for what was to come, ready to shatter the facade and reveal the truth. The hours leading up to the confrontation were agonizing. Every glance at Laura felt like a dagger in my chest, but I had to maintain my composure. I went through the motions of our usual Saturday routine, my mind racing with thoughts of the impending reveal. When Mark arrived that afternoon, carrying his usual easygoing demeanor, I felt a surge of anger. But I couldn't act on it. Not yet. We all settled into the living room, making small talk. My heart pounded in my chest as I waited for the right moment. Finally, I couldn't take it any longer. I stood up, folder in hand, and faced them. "There's something we need to talk about," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and pain. Laura and Mark looked at me, confusion and apprehension evident in their eyes. Without another word, I handed the folder to Laura. She opened it, her face blanching as she flipped through the pages. Mark leaned over to see, his expression shifting from confusion to horror. "What is this?" Laura stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. I took a deep breath, feeling a mix of vindication and heartbreak. "It's the truth," I said. "I know about the affair. I know everything." The room fell into a stunned silence, the weight of my words hanging heavily in the air. The silence that followed was deafening. Laura's face turned pale, and she looked up at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. Mark's reaction was different. His expression hardened, as if he was ready to deny everything. "Daniel, I can explain," Laura began, her voice shaking. but I raised a hand to stop her. "Explain what?" I demanded, my voice rising. "How you've been lying to me for months. How you've betrayed our marriage." I turned to Mark, my so-called friend. "And you, Mark, how could you do this to me? To us?" Mark's jaw tightened. "It's not what you think, Daniel," he said, but his words rang hollow. The evidence was irrefutable, and we all knew it. Laura broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. "I'm so sorry, Daniel. I never wanted to hurt you," she cried. But her apologies felt like empty words. The damage was done, and nothing she said could undo the betrayal. I looked at both of them, my heart breaking anew with each passing second. "I loved you both," I said quietly, my voice thick with emotion. "And you both destroyed that trust. I don't know if I can ever forgive you." With that, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving them to grapple with the consequences of their actions. Leaving Laura and Mark behind, I felt a surge of bitter satisfaction mixed with overwhelming sorrow. I needed to expose Mark further, to those who also trusted him. Our mutual friends had to know the truth. They deserved to understand the depths of his betrayal. That evening, I contacted a few close friends, inviting them over for an impromptu gathering. I chose friends who had known Mark for years, people who would feel the sting of his betrayal almost as deeply as I did. As they arrived, I could see the confusion and concern on their faces. They could sense something was wrong. Once everyone was settled, I took a deep breath and began to speak. "I've discovered something I need to share with you all," I said, my voice steady but my heart racing. I recounted the story, showing them the printed messages as proof. The room filled with gasps and murmurs of disbelief. Mark's closest friends were stunned, their faces reflecting a mix of anger and sorrow. "How could he do this?" one of them muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. The shock and dismay were palpable, but so was the support. They rallied around me, their anger at Mark almost tangible. While it didn't erase the pain, it was a small comfort to know that I wasn't alone in my anger and betrayal. As the evening wore on, our conversations turned to the future and what steps I would take next. Their unwavering support gave me strength, reinforcing my resolve to face whatever came next. The following days were a whirlwind of emotion and fallout. The revelation had rippled through our social circle, and the effects were swift and harsh. Laura's attempts to salvage any semblance of normalcy were futile. Our mutual friends had distanced themselves, and Mark's reputation, once solid, was now in tatters. Family members who had once looked up to Laura and Mark now regarded them with disappointment and anger. My parents, who had always been supportive, were devastated by the betrayal. Their sympathies lay with me, but their concern for me was a mixed blessing. They offered comfort and advice, but their pity only heightened my sense of loss and isolation. Laura and I had tense, awkward conversations about the immediate future. She wanted to make amends, but her words fell on deaf ears. The trust that had been shattered couldn't be repaired with apologies. Our home felt like a battleground, every conversation laced with bitterness and regret. Meanwhile, Mark tried to salvage his damaged relationships, but his efforts were in vain. The hurt and anger I felt were mirrored by those he had wronged. His attempts at justification only served to alienate him further. As the days turned into weeks, it became clear that the fallout from his actions would extend far beyond our personal lives, leaving a trail of broken trust and strained relationships in its wake. As the initial shock began to fade, I found myself grappling with the deeper implications of the betrayal. The emotional turmoil had given way to a more profound, unsettling realization, the extent to which my trust had been shattered. Laura's and Mark's deceit wasn't just a personal betrayal. It felt like an assault on my sense of self and security. I spent hours reflecting on what had gone wrong, replaying memories and conversations to make sense of the deception. The pain was raw and relentless, manifesting in sleepless nights and an overwhelming sense of disorientation. I sought therapy to help navigate the emotional aftermath. Talking to a professional offered me a new perspective and a semblance of understanding, though it didn't erase the hurt. The process of healing was slow and often painful. Friends and family tried to offer support, but their words sometimes felt hollow. The only solace I found was in small victories, moments when I could smile genuinely or laugh without a sense of guilt. I began to realize that healing would be a long journey, one that required me to confront my feelings honestly and build a new sense of trust in myself and others. Every day was a step towards regaining control over my life and emotions. The support from those around me was crucial, but ultimately, I had to navigate this path on my own. As I moved forward, I began to understand that while the betrayal had changed me, it did not define me. As the days turned into weeks, the question of what to do next loomed over me like a dark cloud. The initial decision to confront Laura and Mark had been relatively straightforward compared to the complex choices that lay ahead. I faced a profound dilemma. Should I try to salvage any part of my marriage, or was it time to walk away and rebuild my life from scratch? Laura, despite her remorse, continued to plead for a chance to make things right. She suggested counseling, promising to work on her mistakes and rebuild the trust that had been lost. But every promise felt like an empty gesture in the face of the pain she had caused. The reality of their affair had left me questioning the very foundation of our relationship. Could I ever truly forgive her and restore what we once had? I weighed my options carefully. The thought of continuing with Laura, while potentially healing, seemed like a monumental task fraught with emotional hurdles. On the other hand, leaving her and moving on represented a chance to start anew, free from the shadow of betrayal. I consulted with friends, family, and a therapist, seeking advice and different perspectives. Ultimately, I decided that I needed to focus on my own healing and personal growth before making any long-term decisions. I chose to take time for myself, away from the chaos and hurt, to reflect on what I truly wanted for my future. This period of introspection would allow me to evaluate my feelings and determine the best path forward, free from the immediate pressures of anger and betrayal.